Well, my name is Michael Chiok on behalf of World Salon. I'd like to welcome you to the Digital Fireside Series today. Today the topic is AI value creation, turning AI into measurable value across the portfolio. First, we'll go through introductions and then we'll go right into some questions. Again, my name is Michael Chiok. I'm a partner and managing director with Alex Partners. I lead our operations consulting practice. And one of the unique parts of my role today is I am not only helping clients through the AI journey and through value creation, but I'm also helping our own company. I own a lot of the AI development within Alex Partners and how we're, bringing the best into our own company so that we can be better, faster, more accurate, all of those things that I'm sure everyone is thinking about. So I'll go through the panelists here and introductions. Tom, you want to go?
Sure. Tom Duncan. I'm an operating partner with Summit Park. We're a lower middle market private equity firm. Got about 12 companies in our portfolio, anywhere from business services to consumer e-commerce to aviation, a very broad portfolio of different companies. So excited to be here today.
Divya?
Hey everyone, this is Divya. I'm the founder and CEO of allcaps.ai. So my background, I've been over the last 15 to 17 years, been working on various AI companies. This is my third startup that I've founded, primarily focusing on building AI solutions for large enterprises. Very excited to be here today.
Great, thanks. Eric?
Hi, my name's Eric Wickland. I lead Spaceside Equity. We're a middle market private equity firm based in Ann Arbor, Michigan, that focuses on buying middle market $50 million to $500 million revenue manufacturing and value-added distribution businesses.
Great, thanks. Well, I'll kick us off. The World Salon team was kind enough to prepare a few questions. In the past, I've argued that value creation comes from optimizing the full value chain, not isolated initiatives. And across the PE-backed companies that I've worked at, AI is generally showing up in several EBITDA areas. And there are areas where firms are heavily investing, and some have good actual performance, others don't. And so my response to that is when I think about the whole company and not in isolated initiatives, I work a lot with service-oriented organizations where you really can't untie sales from operations, right? And so when there's those topics, you have to tightly connect them together. So imagine getting a new lead, a new qualified lead. Can you actually service that lead? Who's going to service that lead? And so when we think about value creation in our clients, we have to make those ties in the appropriate spots. Not saying that every single activity is tied that directly to performance and eventually into EBITDA. But when we think about the full company, the full value chain, there are elements in there that we have to think through. And when we think about AI and where folks are investing heavily, I do think that there has been, we had big data one day, then we had data lakes, now we have data platforms, and we have context layers and all these different things. There's still, in my opinion, a belief that there has to be this big data architecture, and which is true. At some point, you need to have all the pipes connected and everything, all that foundation done. But in today's world, I don't believe that all needs to be done at one time. But there are elements that you can tie together, and as long as those foundations are sensical, so to speak, then that's where there's opportunity, and you can create value upfront in the short term while also setting up for the long-term value. I don't know if you guys have any other thoughts on that.
That makes sense, definitely. I mean, data is foundational, so I would love to talk more about that as well. Makes total sense.
Yeah, I would just add that one thing that we're finding is it's not just the data infrastructure, it's the data integrity. Whether you're using it, older forms of, business analytics or whether you're using AI, it all gets down to the quality of your data set. So I think that's a critical component going forward, no matter what your infrastructure is.
Yeah, I would at our firm we talk a lot about engineering the process stack. A lot of people talk about tech stacks and whatnot, but the reason why we talk about the process stack is because we think that contains four parts. One of them being data, but workflows, technology, people, and data tend to be what go into that process stack. And then if you think about the technology that goes into that, AI being one of those things, factory automation, robotics, other industry 4.0 things, those combine to make a process stack. And at the end of the day, process is how work gets done. And you need to have the right data, you need to have the right people, you need to have the right technology, and you need to have the right workflows to make sure that work gets done as efficiently as possible. So agree with everything you're saying there, Michael, and data is definitely a very, very critical piece, and more so with what we're all trying to achieve going forward.
Well, Eric, since you're on a roll, why don't I turn to you? You spent years driving value creation across Speyside Equity's industrial portfolio, and often stepping in after close when the real operating work begins. Across the companies you've worked with, what tends to separate the operational initiatives that actually compound into measurable EBITDA improvement from the ones that maybe lose momentum once management teams are back inside what we'll call day-to-day execution?
Yeah, great question. I would say in an acronym, FMV. Some people might think that means full market value, but actually in this context, it's focus, measurement, and vigilance. And what I mean by that, to break that down a little bit further, focus is about not having too many projects. I worked at a company and I remember giving my boss a hard time at one point and asking him, which one of my 28 number one priorities do you want me to really focus on? And that's too many. So, nobody should probably really ever have, more than 3 to 5. I think threes really should be the upper bound. And in any organization, probably more than like 5 to 7 key initiatives in a year is too many. And again, three feels like the right number most of the time. So focus is important in that way at a macro level. And then more at a micro level, focus is also important. One of my favorite Portco CEOs, he likes to say, for all these key projects, we need to have a single throat to strangle. And that means one person who owns it, that brought it forth, and then also, one person that manages it. So that is very, very critical in terms of getting focus and making sure you're driving accountability. The second thing, measurement, the old saying is really true. I found to be what gets measured gets managed. And in terms of projects and key initiatives, that's two big things. It's time and it's budget. So people's time has a money value, money has a time value. So making sure you understand how that works and what the timing is expected and what the budget in terms of cost to get things done in terms of measurement is really important. And then the last part, vigilance, the V, is you got to stay on top of these things. So, time and budget go perfectly into a project plan, and reviewing that on probably a weekly or, every 2-week basis is really, really critical. Because a lot of times, projects sputter because maybe people don't have the resources to get things done, or folks aren't aware of how their part of the task applies to somebody else's or whatever. So just getting everybody in a room or, on a Zoom nowadays and talking about the written out project plan and what's on schedule or behind schedule and resources that are needed are really important for that vigilance. So again, yeah, that's the really important thing, I think, that we see, FMV, focus, measurement, and vigilance.
Yeah, that resonates. I always joke a lot that you have the first shift, which is our day job, and then the second and third shifts for the projects. And if you have too many of those, there's not enough time or days in the week in order to get them done.
Yeah. So I don't know what experience you guys have had, especially with AI initiatives. Focus has become even harder. Things are changing so fast that it's so hard to know whether or not to focus on something, whether you're going to get a better solution 2 months down the line. Is Anthropic going to come up with a new model that will disrupt everything that you're working
Mhm.
on?
Yeah.
I don't know if it's time to perhaps have some sort of a portfolio management kind of approach where you have to experiment, I guess, and let the experiments sort of decide what to focus on, because otherwise you could just be waiting on the sidelines. Again, I'm open to what you think, Eric or Tom.
No, I think that's right, Divya. I mean, if you do nothing, then
Yeah.
you're going to be way behind, right? And I think some of those foundations, even what Eric was pointing out of, the process and technology, not necessarily that top layer or the process stack that you were talking about, Eric, but like some of the interfaces, as long as the fundamentals are there, and then probably like any good tech development, you still have a skunkworks kind of team testing different things and bringing the best. That's my point of view anyway.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
I, I think that portfolio theory really applies nicely here. So just like just thinking about like buying a portfolio of stocks or investments, to achieve return. Same thing here, right? And we think about it in a lot of businesses we own in terms of CapEx portfolio projects and revenue portfolio, i.e. customers, or things of that nature. I think it's also true with these sorts of projects, which is how does the portfolio stack up? And you might have kind of like some large cap things or some small cap things, some growth things, some value things, and it's probably a little bit of all of it. So you get the greatest, greatest overall return in terms
Yeah.
of the projects you do. So some are going to be a little more risky, some are going to be kind of obvious, right? And less risky. And so I think that portfolio theory applied to this sort of activity is the right way to think about it as well.
Yeah,
Yeah,
makes sense.
I would also add that, I think we're early in the learning curve. I think it's and a lot of these, how AI can be applied to a lot of our businesses. So it is early. And what we're trying to do at Summit Park as much as we can is, have as many irons in the fire as we can. And when we find one that's actually starting to produce value and creating a return on investment, then our job is to try to proliferate that to all the applicable portfolio companies as quickly as possible. So again, it's that test and learn kind of environment where you're finding things that work in one company and you apply them to another.
Yeah, definitely. Divya, why don't we turn to you? Your work is focused on measuring what happens after major operational and commercial decisions are made, particularly once those decisions move out of planning decks and into life systems and workflows. Across the companies you studied, where do you most consistently see value quietly slip between the intention and execution during the hold period? And why does that problem remain so hard for organizations to see in real time?
A great question. Let me perhaps start by giving you some background of the kind of projects that I've had experience working on. So it's been over the last 15 years, my previous company called DataX.ai and the one that I'm working on now, allcaps.ai, primarily focused on deploying large-scale AI solutions across different industries. And these are large companies, Walmart, in retail, Pfizer, AT&T, that sized companies. And the problem that you notice every time, I mean, that people are very excited. And again, as you mentioned, Michael, back then it was called big data analytics, machine learning. Today it's AI, generative AI. But eventually the problems never change. The demos and the prototypes are easy to implement. Where almost all organizations get stuck is in the data. And why is that, right? Most solutions require access not just to structured information, but most of the information in organizations is, large contracts, it could be product specifications, invoices. Information is unstructured and designed for humans, not machines. And that's where all of the issues start. Even with something like generative AI today, like you were mentioning, it's a lot easier than it used to be. At least these AI systems are able to understand unstructured information much better. But imagine a situation where, let's say, you have 5 different versions of a vendor contract. There's an addendum that has updated 2 of the clauses, and you leave the AI to figure things out based on that information. You never know which particular contract is going to get the answer from, and whether you can actually rely on that information. So the data integrity, like Tom mentioned, and ensuring that the AI is actually giving you something that you can trust and trust on an ongoing basis requires a lot of effort in getting the data transformed. So my experience has been that unless you invest a lot of effort in ensuring the data is transformed, and by that what I mean is adding more structured information, adding metadata on top of the information you have, going deep into these documents and figuring out who has access to what information in these documents. And when an AI responds, is it taking care of who's asking the question before responding? If you don't do any of those things, none of the AI deployments that we are seeing today are going to scale. And this has been my experience in the past, where in my previous company, this was all around online commerce and search engines and providing structured information to them. And today at All Caps, it's all about vendor contracts and helping organizations talk between contracts and transactions. So yeah, data transformation, data integrity, that's where all of the effort needs to go if you want to implement AI well.
Yeah, Divya, would love your perspective too on, the context layer, because I think to your point, looking at those contracts, well, it could be, hey, you're looking at 1 section, 2 sections. Can you share a little bit about your thoughts there?
Yeah, so the context layer is, you need to go deep into, for example, let me take an example of what we do at All Caps. We are basically looking at enterprise contract rights. So things like volume discounts, SLA credits, rebates that may exist in a contract. And in order for an AI to understand what is contained in those clauses, it needs to go deep and extract each and every clause and structure it differently before the AI can get access to it. The system that sits on top can get access to it and make sense of it, and compare it again with transactions in an ERP, in an invoice, before making any conclusions. So unless you can have a taxonomy on top of all of this information, which classifies the contracts as well as the information underlying those contracts, and also adds metadata around access controls. For example, a very simple example is, let's say the AI has access to salary information of all the employees. The AI has access, but as an employee, should you be able to ask the salary of your boss or the CEO of your company? You should not be. And so the only way to block that is through metadata that you provide to the AI. AI has no understanding otherwise. That kind of information, right? Unless you do these things, and then citation and audit trails, that's extremely important. You cannot have an AI system making decisions autonomously, which is what we're going to have in the future, and have absolutely no accountability. I think Eric mentioned having one person who you can catch the neck of, or I don't know what words he used, Eric. But how do you catch hold of the AI's neck, right? The only way you can do that is have these audit trails. And how are you going to have audit trails if you don't understand where the data came from and have actually an understanding of how the decisions were made? So you can't just throw a chat GPT on top of your data, basically, and hope things work out.
Hope is still not a strategy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me turn to you, Tom. In your role at Summit
Sure.
Park, you're often responsible for turning growth and innovation initiatives into measurable outcomes across your portcos. When it comes to AI and operational programs, where do you see the gap between what gets prioritized at the fund level and what actually gets executed at the company level? And how does that gap potentially show up in results?
Well, I would step back and say, you know, I'm not sure we're planning out AI at this point at the fund level or at the portfolio level. We're really, I think we're concerned with, I think, two main areas, and one is, how do we use AI to create value at the company level? And again, we have a broad portfolio of very differentiated businesses. So how AI is applied in each one of those can be different, and yet it can also be very similar because there's obviously similar processes. And I think, getting back to something that Eric talked about is measurement. I think that's critical when you start talking about identifying these, what value creation can be driven by these AI initiatives. Really understanding how you're measuring them, very clear KPIs up front, and tracking those on a very regular basis. So you really, you're not spending a lot of time spinning your wheels on some of these projects. But I would also say the other thing that I think is critical when we start talking about AI, and is not just how it's applied within your own companies, but we look at it as how it's applied within the industry where we're competing. Because I think the first rule of value creation is don't destroy value. So really understanding how AI is being, whether there's disintermediation opportunities within an industry, I think is really critical. We do that not only in our existing businesses and existing verticals we're competing in, but also when we talk about due diligence, when we're looking at new companies to bring in the portfolio. I think that's a critical part, is trying to look around the corner and see, what is going to happen down the road in this industry, and how is AI going to change it or transform it? Because I personally think it's going to really be transformative in almost every industry. So.
Yeah, no, I think we were talking earlier about it needs to be a part of the roadmap, and in everyone's plans. And there are areas that are probably more likely to succeed versus not, cost versus revenue. There's probably pockets of that.
Yeah. Again, getting down into specific areas, I'd be curious for the other panelists to understand, where they're seeing it actually applied and showing value creation. I know one of the areas that I've seen is really taking these large data sets where humans can't really do any kind of, it's just beyond human capability to manage. For example, one of our portfolio companies, a consumer-facing company, we took 5,000 sales calls and we loaded it into AI, and we had it digest it for patterns and cues, and we were able to take all that rich data and then go back and refeed it back into our sales team, telling them, hey, these are the cues that customers are giving us. We also use it for lead scoring to be able to go in there and say, okay, now we know when someone gets on that first introductory phone call and they say X or Y, we know then what the probability of that customer is, or that prospect of converting down the line. And I think just having AI and using it on some of these specific use cases is where we've seen the most value created so far.
Yeah, I would agree, Tom. And some of our earlier successes a few years ago, as we are starting down the journey, was actually in something that we call a propensity model, right? Mm-hmm. Which I think goes along with what you're saying is, what are the attributes? And I think most companies have better sales data than they do, like procurement data as an example, which can be a lot harder to normalize. And that's where, early wins, I would say, were coming from that. Very aligned with what you were saying is, can you arm the sales team with better information so that you can place those bets, whether it's, more digital marketing or even in some cases that we've seen, paper marketing. I think the richness of the data, to Divyap's point, really lends itself there, at least early.
Yeah, I mean, customer support is a use case that I've seen a lot already, and primarily because most of the questions, right, they tend to be very, very simple.
Mhm.
People lose their passwords and they want to know how to get my password back, or you'll notice, I mean, especially in consumer products or B2C type of SaaS products, 90% of the questions can easily be answered by these AI systems now. And that's been one of the first successful use cases outside of vibe coding or code generation, which is obviously one of the
Right.
biggest areas where
Sure.
already you can see traction, right? A lot of companies are completely shifting to coding through these AI agents. So those two are pretty large use cases that I've heard of outside of what we do at All
Mhm.
Caps. But yeah, I think still early days though. Um, Anything where there's a lot of unstructured data, like you mentioned, which
Right.
is hard to digest. It's lying around, nobody has the time, and humans become bottlenecks because you need to go through that information before you can make any decisions. All of those are reasonably good targets for AI.
Yeah, I agree. So maybe Eric and Tom, it'd be great to know from your perspective, as we look at across success, in investing from a private equity standpoint, there's typically a range like 3 to 8% of value identified early that doesn't get actualized or realized in the hold period. Does that reflect what you're seeing in your companies? And if yes or no, or where do the gaps show up most clearly in practice as you're operating these companies or supporting the operations of these companies?
Do you want to go first, Tom, or you want me to?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I would say that maybe we think about that a little bit differently than maybe some other PE firms. So kind of what we try to do is we have, I guess, what we call a value accretion framework. And in that value accretion framework, there are 4 modules or other frameworks. One is the Portco value creation system. That's all about improving EBITDA margins and EBITDA. And then there's the multiple accretion framework, which is all about how do we improve the exit multiple. And then we have the process assessment framework, and then the human capital assessment framework. And when we think about the Portco value creation system, that's broken up into 2 phases. Phase 1 is all about operational improvement, and then phase 2 is more about growth. So we like to call it a fix and build strategy. So a lot of times we'll buy things where we can improve them and then grow them. So fix it, then grow it. And what we tend to do in our underwrites is we underwrite phase 1, usually to a 3x MOIC. But over the history of our firm, we've actually achieved better results than that. So the point though is like we don't usually plan for 3 to 8% below. We're usually planning for a couple 100% above because we don't underwrite macroeconomic trends or bolt-on acquisitions, or even though we think about multiple accretion, we don't put it in the LBO model. Now, what I will say though is what we like to try to do is kind of play private equity with a stacked deck, if you will. So what that means is in our Portco value creation system, we'll identify in any given company 3 to 5 things that we think we can do in phase 1 to improve the EBITDA margins and EBITDA, knowing that probably, if we have 3 identified, 1's probably not going to go right, or if we have 5 identified, 2 probably aren't going to go right. So while that 8 to 10% of loss, to your point, is, we don't plan for that. I guess I would argue we plan for, kind of like a 30 to 40%, 1 out of 3 or 2 out of 5 sort of a situation where it doesn't go according to plan. And it's just kind of, I think you kind of have to accept that as an investor. Like if you expect you're going to put together a plan and everything's going to go according to plan, you're nuts. I've got a bridge in Brooklyn to sell you because, 15 years of doing private equity, I've literally never seen that. Well, I kind of seen it once. And I think it was, it's just like, it's an anomaly. It's like if you put monkeys in a room with enough typewriters, they'll type out the Bible at some point,
Yeah.
as well. But the point being, we just got lucky. It all went the way I planned it. I did not expect that though. If you would have said, "Do you think this will actually happen?" I would have been like, "Hell no." It just so the fact that it did was not what I planned. So I guess that's how I think about it. It's hard to plan to get everything right, and for us, we work under the assumption some things are not going to go right, and therefore you've got to plan it out accordingly. That you plan for things to go wrong. So another way to say it too is back to that focus thing I was talking about relative to project management, which is that if you have too many things, too many initiatives that you're thinking are going to create value, that doesn't work from a underwrite either. So said differently, you can't try to boil the ocean. You're better to focus and find 3 to 5 key things and do those well, in my personal opinion.
Got it.
Yeah, I would echo what Eric said. I mean, we obviously focus very heavily in the first 100 days and the first 6 months and the first 2-year plan of value creation that we're driving forward. A lot of that early work is really just, pick and shovel stuff where we're, working with the infrastructure, the people, just kind of the fundamental parts of the business that we need to get into a level where we can start implementing much more aggressive growth targets. So yeah, I don't know about the 8 or 10%. I'm kind of with Eric. I think, we're shooting for the, we're gonna probably over plan as far as what we want to achieve, and then we'll break those out into tiers of projects based on what we think is the ease of implementation versus the return that we can get on them. And so we're just like Eric, focus on the top 2 or 3. Don't get overwhelmed by 20 different projects pulling you in different directions. And really look at, I think, ease of implementation is something I think sometimes a lot of, when we start talking about value creation projects, we don't think about. We're always looking at that. We're elephant hunting, or we're looking at the big payoff at the end of the game. And we're tending to say, hey, if I can get 3 or 4 singles, sometimes that's better than a home run. So.
Yeah, I agree. In value creation, I feel like when you hit the singles or even take the walk, it gets some momentum rolling.
Yeah.
And then that momentum, draws other opportunities. Divya, do you want to chime in?
I mean, I can give my perspective based on what we are doing here. So as I think Tom mentioned, you need to find these low-hanging fruits. There's always several areas where you could potentially have your portfolio companies get your 3 to 8% EBITDA improvement without much structural changes. And frankly, my last, after I sort of exited from my first startup and while I was searching for the next one, the thing that I was looking for is what is that AI application where I can go and help companies that without necessarily having any sort of structural changes needed. And one area is a lot of companies invest a lot of time negotiating vendor contracts. So there's a lot of effort that goes into negotiating rights and so on. But I was surprised to see, even in the largest of organizations, whether it's an IBM or a Pfizer or whatever, these contracts just get archived and nobody is actually ensuring whether any of those rights are being enforced. And part of the reason is everyone is busy. If it's procurement, they're focusing on procurement. Finance is focusing on processing the invoices, maybe matching with purchase orders. Legal is satisfied once the contracts are negotiated. So there's a very interesting piece that we found, and Gartner and others have written about it. There's something like 3 to 8% leaking from each of these vendor contracts right now. And the leakage is that people are simply not claiming the rights that they have. And these are volume discounts, credits, rebates. It could even be commodity price fluctuation related discounts. For example, if oil prices change dramatically, there are many contracts that have clauses that protect you against such things, but nobody has the time to actually go in these contracts and figure out what can be saved. So an AI system, just like Tom mentioned, because this is so much data, you can point an AI system to all your vendor contracts, get the clauses out, compare it with transactions, and on a regular basis identify and even come up with a claim request, send it out to the vendor, get the money back. That's an easy EBITDA gain without necessarily having any sort of structural changes to the organization or taking any major risk. It's just money that's lying around. So that's been, I mean, so far it's been pretty good. A lot of companies seem to have the problem.
Yeah, and I think even in companies that are performing well, it's easy to, leave that on the table because everything's working well. The service levels are there.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a great point. Maybe I'll turn back to you. As you think about AI and operational initiatives that delivered measurable results, what have you learned? We talked a little bit about sequencing already and getting that low-hanging fruit. But what else do you think needs to be in place operationally before an initiative has, kind of that real chance of sticking and then compounding after that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this can be answered better if you just sort of reverse the question that what leads to failures, because 70-80% of all AI initiatives do fail. And we all know that, right? A lot of demos go pretty well and then nothing happens beyond that. Part of the reason is people simply don't realize the value and the effort that's needed in just building the engineering infrastructure to make and scale these systems. The other part is actually, especially in large organizations, what I've seen is nobody really wants to change. So change is resisted by almost everyone in the organization. So if you are going to implement a system that completely changes the workflow, it's not going to work, right? So the system that you design, firstly, needs to solve a problem. It needs to make life easier for the person that is going to be using it without necessarily disrupting their current workflows. So I would break it down to two things. One is the data infrastructure, which I talked a little bit about earlier. So unless you have this data transformation layer implemented first before you think about any AI systems. So one example I can take is, and this infrastructure is based on the kind of data you have and the kind of use cases. So it's not a generic data platform or a data lake that I'm talking about here. That's not going to solve your problem. You need infrastructure and metadata based on the use cases. If it's a sales related or a customer support related problem, you need to have metadata associated with that. If it's marketing, if it's HR, if it's procurement, each of those has, it's almost like capturing the tribal knowledge or capturing the way you would approach a problem, training the AI for it to be able to respond in the way a human in your organization would respond. And for that, you need to have that data transformation layer. And beyond that, anything that completely changes the process is going to be resisted. So if you want a system that gets implemented and gets used and scales throughout the organization, you need to have these two in place. And I've never seen any AI deployments work unless you have both.
Yeah, I'll take the piece around the change management that you touched on. And I think right now, as we think about leveraging AI into measurable, outcomes, there really needs to be a shift, in my opinion, of how we interact with the data, right? So it used to be, and I'm moving forward ahead here, of a dashboard where I might look at performance or KPIs, et cetera, as opposed to a prompt that says, how's Divya doing this week with sales, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and the pipeline. And the way that we so now it's the metadata and making sure that's correct, but it's also we got to reteach ourselves how should we ask that question, right?
Absolutely.
Because depending on that, it could bring you a different answer. It won't be a wrong answer, but it may not be just based operationally or which function you're working in. It just might give you a slight different flavor, which I think we get today in some shapes and forms.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's coming as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, the Tableau world, the BI dashboards, reports, etc. It used to be more like complete flooding of information and reports, which
Yeah.
mostly nobody looked at, which has now changed to more bite-sized information. You can actually ask exactly what you need today while you are in a meeting. And I think that interface change has to happen. It's almost like talking to someone else, but much more knowledgeable than anyone else in the organization.
Yeah. Eric, I'll turn back to you just in thinking about this concept of the change management with your portcos. Is that FMV? Is that pretty standard for Speyside to communicate and people buy into it?
Yeah, those types of things. I mean, I think the thing that I think about a little bit is, change is hard because it's a human component. It kind of reminds me of this story I read. I don't remember to whom this is attributed, but it's not me. But the story is about guys digging trenches with shovels. And when the backhoe was invented, somebody said, "Great, we'll start using these backhoes." And the pushback on that, the change pushback was, "Well, we got 100 guys out there using shovels. If we use backhoes, we'll only need like 5 guys." And the response to that was, "Well, should we all just give them a spoon then and use 1,000 guys? Because that doesn't make sense, right?" But you think about AI, and I think people are a little bit worried about AI for that result. And for that kind of same reason, it's like the change and the effect on people. And my view of the world is that getting people aligned and incentivized really, really matters in organizations. If you think about especially big companies, like the bigger the company, generally the more hierarchical, the more political the managers tend to be. And what that means is they spend more time thinking about politics versus shareholder value. And so I think getting people aligned around what matters is really, really important to lay the groundwork and get in front of the root cause before it persists in these situations. And what I mean by that is you want to get people aligned and incentivized around shareholder value, or what we're all calling value creation, because most of the people that come from like really big companies or big organizations, they tend to get compensated based on size and or growth, not based on the equity value of the business.
Yeah.
So when we're thinking about AI, I think the key here is to first put in place programs that are around delivering bonuses or equity LTIPs around shareholder value or equity value, and then explaining why AI and other tools like automation and robotics and digital twin and all that stuff allows that company to be more profitable and create more shareholder value. So that way you don't have the fight as big of a fight, because then the people using it see it as a tool to be used. And so back to my analogy, you compensate them based on how many trenches you get dug per day, versus how many spoons are getting used to dig the trenches.
Yeah, makes sense.
That's great. I'm going to use that one, by the way. That's a great analogy. Envision the 1,000 spoons. Tom, as we look ahead, if the four of us were to sit down for a cup of coffee in a year and a half from now, what do you think will have separated firms that consistently turn some of these concepts into initiatives and then into EBITDA, hopefully, from those that continue to experiment and maybe don't, go all in on this?
Oh, great question. If I knew that one, I think I would be in a different situation. But Yeah, I mean, I don't think the fundamentals are changing. I think I get back with Eric. I think, AI is just a tool. It's like any other tool that we have. It's a very powerful tool. I think it's going to be a transformational tool, but it's a tool, right? And, whether it's a
Yeah.
spoon or a backhoe or a shovel, right? To me, it all gets back. It's going to get back to people and the people and how they implement, and their willingness to embrace and adopt and implement these new technologies. And then, again, following up on what Eric said, process. I mean, you fall back on those two things as people and process. And those I don't think are going to change whether you have AI or any kind of technology. So I think those are the firms that are going to win, the ones that can really excel in both those areas.
Derek?
Yeah, no, I agree with things Tom's pointing out, and I think it's comes back to focus in a lot of cases, and
Mhm.
really truly you got to decide how you're going to use the resources of an organization. A lot of people talk about strategy being like, okay, what do we decide to do? I think a lot of strategy actually is more about what you decide not to do, right?
Mm.
Because
Yep.
either if you think about most large organizations with lots of resources,
Mhm.
they can do lots and lots and lots and lots of things. So the question becomes like more, or I think the more interesting question is like, what are you good at? And we all learned in cool MBA school about sustainable competitive advantage based on core competencies. That sounds really cool. But what does it really mean? It means like, okay, do the stuff you're good at that makes money. And I think that people need to be honest with themselves relative to these sorts of initiatives and need to make it a decided effort to be good at them if they're going to go. And where are you going to use and focus the tool versus where are you not going to, focus the tool? And some of that's a bit of, core competencies and sustainable competitive advantage. Where can you use it to execute your strategy well? Like, don't try to boil the ocean with it, because if you do that, you'll get nothing done. You'll get 80% of 100 projects done, which amounts to, value creation of nothing. So that's my view. Like, how does it, if you have I make all my portcos do a 1-page strategy, and I tell them, if you can't explain this to a fifth grader, you don't have a strategy. So then the next build on that, in my opinion, the derivative of that relative to like AI would be, explain to a third grader how AI is going to help that strategy get executed. So I think that's really, really, really critical. And then be specific about it and tell me all the things you're not going to use AI to do and you've thought
Yeah.
about it. So focus on the things that is going to create value, prioritize them. There are plenty of ways to do that we're all aware of. It's, just a weighted kind of rating, mechanism to do that. And then do the top 3 to start with. And then you can, do the other ones later once you've checked those off the list.
Yeah, that's a great point. I would also add that I think one of the things that's going to start driving is, human creativity, relying on those things. I know I have a friend of mine, by the way, is in a software-based business. And, because now, AI is doing all the coding, it's not an issue of productivity. They've cleaned out all of the projects that they had, and, all the products they wanted to do, all the features they've set they wanted to add, they've done it. And now their struggle is creatively deciding what else can we do? What do we need to do? And so I think that's going to be in certain businesses, it's going to get back to, as AI makes us just more and more productive, it's going to start putting more emphasis on, um,
Yeah, and I
be
think to that
creative and
point,
innovative and
we've gone through several iterations of this. I have some battle scars from outsourcing 20 plus years ago, where there was some fear around that. But it'll be interesting to see, white space that's created in our 4 lives, for me, has created opportunities to think differently, or whatever that might be, rather than searching for the data or all of those things. And it should drive another kind of expansion and that's a great, fantastic point. Do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, so my view on this is, of course, AI is a tool, like everyone said, but it's a tool that we've never seen before. It's more transformative than anything ever seen in the past. And but what I'm learning, as my productivity goes up, I'm a startup with just 3 people. If I had started this company maybe 10 years back, I would be having at least 30 people in the organization doing basically the same amount of work. So as a startup, since you're starting afresh, you get to use all of these AI agents.
Yeah.
2 things I don't think will ever be able to do, right? One is knowing what to focus on, and the second is knowing when to stop. Humans are really, really good at it. Okay, humans are very good at completely ignoring things that are not relevant. It seems like a very simple thing, but the hardest thing for all of these AI systems to do right now is have guardrails. When we were initially building some implementations, let's say it's supposed to answer questions on a certain product. It's a customer support bot. It should only answer questions on that particular product. It's very, very hard to do. I don't know whether you've seen some of these these very interesting videos of someone asking a McDonald's chatbot on how to solve a calculus problem, and it actually starts solving it, right? Because these AI systems simply, no matter how hard you try, you cannot make it not do something. So I think humans will always be, the creativity, focus, knowing when a project should stop. You will be in control of all those activities. Even though the AI is going to improve your productivity considerably, it's not going to start doing any of those things. So I think it's a combination, and especially the LLMs that we have today. I mean, I don't know what kind of AI systems are going to come up in the future, but this is a tool that helps you do things faster, better, but it doesn't tell you what to do, and it doesn't tell you when to stop.
I've always wondered with that, like if you could, to your point about McDonald's bot doing calculus,
Yeah.
like when I was way back when in undergrad and doing like, taking programming, classes and stuff like that. Like sometimes we would mess with each other by like if somebody wasn't paying attention, you'd insert like an infinite loop into their program. And
Yeah.
then like, it would just keep going forever and ever and ever because it's just, obviously it's an infinite loop. And I kind of wonder if like, people won't do that to like AI systems just to like, mess with them.
They're
It's a little
doing
bit
it already.
scary. Yeah, okay.
It's happening.
So
It's happening. Yeah.
like it sounded like it was kind of a funny practical joke back then. Maybe not. Now it would not be because like see the whole grid crashing because
Yeah.
AI is like trying to solve an infinite loop problem. But the other thing I think that's interesting about AI, like, or what I've been, what I understand is like, there's kind of 2 types of thinking. It's like you've got analytical thinking, which your analytic thinking generally, in humans, which is measured by IQ, and then you've got synthetic thinking, which there's not great, measurements for that, but I kind of think of it as CQ, creative quotient. The difference being like, analytic thinking is, convergent such that it's known inputs and a known solution. It's just like how quickly can you get to the known solution? AI seems to do that really well. Divergent thinking, i.e., taking a bunch of ideas and putting them together to come up with a brand new idea, it doesn't do so well. And that's the thing that humans do exceptionally well, which is creative, divergent thinking. What's interesting about that to me, anyway, is everything I've read is neuroscientists can't explain how that happens, actually. So, like, they can explain how analytic convergent thinking occurs, like, logical deduction. They understand the synapses. They don't understand why you get an epiphany in the shower in the morning. And I don't think AI will ever do that. But what's interesting about what I just said then is like, you know, if you're a creative left brain person and you're not so good at like, you know, the fast analytic math stuff, you know, and you can have AI do that for you. Maybe it means that the creatives are going to rise in the new AI situation, right? So what's also
No doubt
interesting
about
about that is the people that like, you know, we think about and hold up in the world as like, wow, this guy was a once in a generation thinker, the Einstein, the Da Vinci's, whatever. Most of those guys had like pretty high IQs, like 150 to 160, but their creative thinking was like off the charts and measurable, and they could do both things in concert at the same time. So if you can have AI do the, you know, the IQ stuff for you and you're a really creative person, you should have a leg up in the world is the upshot of this long diatribe.
Mhm.
Well,
Yeah.
one thing you sparked, Eric, though, in that, completely agree, but you also need the team who helps you implement, right? So the creative idea might be there, but actually there's a team of people usually behind those people that help get it and take it to market, whatever that is. But it's interesting. I never thought about it that way of, you know, the AI will think of something linearly probably as opposed to a big idea, right, that comes out of whatever that's happening. That's fascinating. Maybe one last question. I'll point at Tom. Where do you see typically your portfolio companies the most resistance when new initiatives, whether it's AI or anything else, are rolled out? And what typically works, you know, to overcome it from your experience?
Wow. Again, great question. Wish I knew the answer. Uh, I get, you know, it just comes down to, you know, whether people have a growth mindset. Again, where we deal lower middle market, maybe our companies are a little less sophisticated than Eric's or some of the other uh, folks on the panel. But yeah, it's all about do the people implementing or managing the business, do they have a growth mindset? Are they open to new ideas? Are they open to new things and ways of doing things? And I think that's one thing that we try to solve for very early when we're doing our due diligence, making sure that, you know, we have that in the leadership team of the company. And then yeah, I think, you know, anytime you're talking about new technologies, new ways of doing things, it's, you know, people are people, and some enjoy that and they relish it, and they others, you know, kind of are fearful of it and don't embrace it. So, but I think, you know, again, then it's on us to make sure that, you know, I think Divya said earlier, you know, getting some early wins, showing how this stuff can really make their life easier and you know, achieve their goals. And I think that's, you know, one of the things where at least we're focused on is, you know, trying to
Yeah.
get some good singles early.
Yeah. Eric, did you have any thoughts?
Yeah, one thought. I think I want to extend a little bit on what Eric said. I think one sign we're going to see is the creatives are going to start getting paid a lot more than the technical folks. We've seen so far all of the tech guys, engineering, STEM, getting, you know, paid more and being more valued in the organization, and almost everyone else who has the domain knowledge. So if you're a procurement guy, you probably understand procurement way better than anyone else, and you probably have ideas of how to make things better because you're actually on the ground solving a problem, but you're stuck because the CTO or the engineering folks or the guy who can even make the dashboard for you is too occupied or unavailable in the organization, right? That person is now in your hands all the time, and is smart enough to be able to solve things. All you have to say is, "Hey, make me a dashboard," and it makes a dashboard for you. So I think we're gonna see people who have more agency, who are willing to think of new ways of improving the organization, who are more creative in the way they do things, are going to start getting more valued. And by valued, I mean they're going to get paid a lot more in organizations. I think that change is definitely coming. My son is doing engineering, and I'm letting him know that he better be creative and have more agency if he wants to continue to have value in companies of the future.
That makes me feel so good about the fact that I took those 5 art classes in high school now, and argued with my parents about taking them. So it was a good argument with my dad. If I took AP Calculus 2, I could take my 5th art class. So see, now it's worth it. But I actually agree with you. It makes me think of like a Michelangelo quote, right? Where he said, I saw the angel in the marble, and it was my job to carve until I set it free. And I think that's the thing, right? Which is like the artistic class will rise. They can see the angel in the marble where a lot of the rest of us can't. But now they have a chisel and a hammer in form of AI and robotics to carve the marble. So I think that you're right there. It's very important that people have both sides. They can do both parts.
Yeah.
I think the other thing we're seeing is that, because execution is no longer the constraint, and a lot of these things where AI can make you so much more productive and you can fail so much quicker, you can try a lot more things. I know, how that's going to be implemented long term, I don't know, but we have digital marketing and things where where you used to have to sit there and choose which 5 ads are we going to run. Now you run 100 and you just pick the ones that work. So the dynamic is changing a little bit because again, execution is no longer the constraint. It's more creativity and picking the right thing.
Yeah, and I think in today's world, I think based on everything that I've learned from you guys, fail fast has probably been one of a similar motto we've all had. Now you can do it even faster and pivot even faster. So there should be less constraint in that creativity, which makes it a super interesting world to live in right now, particularly as we think about value creation, value delivery.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'd love to thank the team at World Salon for hosting us, for pulling us together. Thank you, Eric, Divya, Tom, for your insights. Just a few key takeaways for me in terms of AI and value creation. Probably no shock to those listening in. No silver bullet. It's not you can't just create Rome in a day. Eric has much better quotes than me, so I got to take some lessons from him. Prioritization is still a big part of what needs to happen in terms of hitting those singles and building up and gaining the momentum. Foundation is still there, whether it's process, people, technology, data, all of those things that need to be present in order to really drive that value creation. And then the last part, I think, which is tracking, I think, between all 3 of our panelists here, you all pointed out a little bit differently, right? Whether it's, Divya, you're talking about the SLAs, Eric, the validation on the value creation, Tom, where are we actually getting the wins? I think that the continued tracking so that, the change management can happen, the value creation can happen. All of those things, I think, are still super important. Even as AI continues to grow, some of those foundations are still quite important in order to drive value creation. So thank you, guys. I hope you have a good rest of the week. And thanks to everyone who joined.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a good day.